Ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to program video games. The thought of solving complex problems in the form of entertainment for tens, hundreds, or thousands of people has always came off as incredibly captivating to me. It's a form of problem solving and critical thinking that I believe is a lot like solving a puzzle. And I think if more people were to give it a shot, they would realize one, how accessible it is, and two, how fun it is to actually do. Programming in recent years has become a way more accessible skill than ever. But that hasn't always been the case. Riley Ralston mentions in her article Computer Games, in the 1950s and 60s, computers were scarce and they were expensive to use. It was generally frowned upon in computer centers to build video games at all. But that kind of illustrates my point, isn't it? Back in the day, in the 1950s and 60s, computers were not accessible to use at all. But I'm here to say, with advancements in programming, such as high level programming languages and ways to conceptually think about programming, like object oriented programming, and free text editors online and programming tools, that programming, for the average person, has become more accessible than ever. First, let's get into high level programming languages. What is a high level programming language? You might be thinking, high level, that must be more difficult, because you're generally trained to think higher level, like in a video game, it's more difficult. It's quite the opposite. We're just separating from what your computer's actually doing and just translating that to the computer in almost basic English with programming languages like Python. That's the beauty of it. You can just understand basic English and kind of know what's going on without needing to know how to program at all. Computer scientist Mark Lutz mentioned in his article Learning Python, Python programs can be written quickly and easily by just trying a few commands. Quite the far cry from what I've mentioned earlier, isn't it? Before, in the 1950s and 60s, you had to have special skills and spend all of this money. But now, by just understanding basic English, having a computer, and trying out a few commands, that you can write a program, making building software with high level programming languages more accessible than ever. So, we talked about writing code, but now let's talk about conceptually thinking about code or ways to build software, because that's actually a fairly difficult task to do without these programming paradigms like object oriented programming. What is object oriented programming? You might be thinking. Edwin D. Riley, in his article named Object Oriented Programming, basically illustrates it as object oriented programming models programming by associating it with real life objects. Well, what does that even mean? So basically, what that means is you take a real life object and you take everything that it needs to do and you put it all together into a nice little Lego brick. I can walk you through it in a very simple task right now. So let's say I'm creating a video game and I want to make a cat for my video game. Well, all I have to do is think about all the things a cat does. A cat eats, a cat drinks, a cat jumps, a cat walks. I just have to program every individual's task of that. Now I have this perfect little Lego brick I can throw around in my video game all over the place, and I can put cats anywhere I want in it. So let's go on and move on to text editors and see how that helps it be more accessible for the average Joe in learning programming. Text editors are very akin to spell checking on your phone or however you write. So everyone uses text editors all the time. You spell things wrong and it fixes it for you. Well, let's translate that logic to, say, programming. You might write a command slightly wrong, and then your text editor will be like, oh, that's a very common use case. Let's fix it right there, right and now. So that makes it more accessible, right? Because even if you make a mistake, you have tools to fix it immediately for you. Not only that, but high-level languages like Python that I mentioned earlier have ways to manage data and do these complex things under the hood so you don't have to manually think about it. It makes it easier to write code than ever. In conclusion, software has become more accessible to program than ever. Things like high-level programming languages make writing programs akin to modern-day English. Paradigms like object-oriented programming, like building Lego bricks, and availability in software tools, making programming easier to write than ever by fixing all of your mistakes, has made programming more accessible to the average Joe than ever before. This is very exciting to me, because now I know people like me will be able to achieve their dreams more than ever and build whatever game and whatever software that they want.